Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to talk about talking to the general public at shows. So today's video grew out of a recent event that I went to. So earlier in the week I put out a video about the game that the Postage Rejects ran at the Rapture Gaming Festival at Chatham Docks. Now, as a group, we've not done this particular event before, and it is very different from a regular game show because it's more than just wargaming. There was a really good wargaming section with plenty of local clubs being represented and some really nice tables, but that was only a tiny part of the overall event. There was role-playing games, board games, computer games, simulators of all types, mostly noisy, cosplayers. Every manner of geekdom was being represented, and because it's within the gigantic, I think it's 80-acre site of the docks, it was obviously attracting a different type of audience than would normally turn up for the sort of game show where we would do a demo game, and that created an interesting talking point afterwards, because we were discussing as a group about how the sort of people that were coming up and looking at our table and asking questions were different from normal. And it got me thinking about, have you ever had to adjust the way you sell your hobby to people depending on the audience that's coming up to have a look at your demonstration table? So Postage Rejects have put on a few demo games over the years, usually do one at the Broadside show in Kent, but we have done one at other smaller shows before. And obviously when you're attending a wargame show and you're going to put on a demo game, you're expecting a certain type of punter to be coming around. Basically people like you and I, who are interested in wargames, play wargames, and are coming to see what other groups are doing and to be inspired. And we, especially if you're within the historical gaming community, we fully expect the people we talk to totally nerd out about their subject. We all do it, but sometimes you will get people come up that are visiting an event that are not wargamers. They're just there because they're curious. And sometimes it'll be families, sometimes it'll be couples, that have popped in and decide to have a little look around. What's this strange event going on? And of course, you have to adjust how you deliver your conversation when you're talking to non-wargamers compared to wargamers. So, for instance, when Postage Rejects put on a game, we'll always have plenty of signage. I mean, I've done this before, I've done articles, videos before about what I think a good demo game should have, but the bare minimum is some really good signage so that people know what your game is about, and if they take photographs they can easily identify it. We usually have a leaflet of some kind, some sort of handout, and that is usually relatively detailed, maybe 1 or 2 sides of A4 with enough information on there about the historical period that we're playing, but also information about the manufacturers and who made the models and who made the buildings, and is there anything scratch built, that sort of thing. And then there'll be all of our sort of social media contact information in there for the various members of the group that have got those sort of things, so blogs and so on. And of course that sort of leaflet is primarily aimed at other wargamers, and generally when we're talking to other wargamers, we'll give them a shortened version of what we've written in the leaflet. When I say shortened version, we can happily chat away for 10-15 minutes to another wargamer because they're as interested in the history as we are. But you do get occasions when you get non-wargamers come up to the table, and then you have to approach talking to them slightly differently. Now, I don't want to come across as, I'm not by any means trying to be condescending here, but obviously the level of enthusiasm a historical wargamer has for their periods, or indeed any historical periods, is going to be radically different from a member of the public who's just out of curiosity popped into a show and is looking around, maybe seeing wargames and wargamers for the first time. And I'd like to think that the groups that are talking to people are moderating and tempering the way they speak, the information they give across, so that they're not talking to a non-wargaming member of the public in exactly the same they would another wargamer. We may be gushing and enthusiastic about every other button on that blazer, or the particular piece of history, the wargame that we play. But for the general public, maybe they're not as interested in history. And the last thing I think any of us would like to do is to scare them off, for them to go running for the hills going, what a bunch of weirdos. And I'm sure that has happened in the past, because let's face it, we are a bunch of weirdos. I'm first to admit this. We do have a peculiar hobby, a fantastic and peculiar hobby, but nonetheless, to outsiders, we can probably come across as a little bit strange. So I think it's actually important when we are doing a demo game at a show, particularly when we think the person coming up to us is a non-wargamer, that we change the way that we present that game to them, that we don't just bombard them with a load of history. We actually ask them questions. Do you know anything about this period in history? Are you interested in history? Do you play war games? So we might give them a shorter version of the history of the game. Why are we playing it? Why are we choosing it? And we talk a little bit more perhaps about what wargaming is, and we'll ask them questions in the idea of creating a conversation. And this is a technique that I use in my work world as well. When I'm talking to people, I very much take an attitude that it needs to be a conversation and not an interrogation. And that's two ways, so that when you're talking to lay people, if you like, people that aren't wargamers, that you encourage them to join in the conversation and to share something, rather than sit there glassy-eyed while you go on about your wonderful hobby, and while you might find it interesting, and the wargamer over there might find it interesting, and those wargamers over there might find it interesting. The general member of the public may not be quite as enthusiastic about the period of history that you're studying, or the sets of miniatures that you've got. A general member of the general public doesn't really care who makes the figures, but they might be interested in, why are you collecting these? What is it about this particular period of history that has attracted you? How do you wargame? How do you coordinate the figures? Because that's a common question that I will get from non-wargamers, asking, well, how do you play the game? And then you explain, different sets of rules and different techniques and all that, but we use dice and various other techniques. So that's the sort of conversation you want to be having when you're talking to members of the public. And this brings me to the Rapture Wargame show. Now, as I mentioned, when we do the broadside show, obviously we're aiming a lot at other wargamers, but we also seem to get quite a lot of non-wargamers turn up. It is, after all, set in a busy sports centre, and the last show that we done, there was some sort of sports event going on outside, so no doubt families and other groups of people that were attending that saw that there was another event going on, and wandered in later in the day to have a look around. So we did see quite a few non-wargamers there, but at the Rapture show, because it was a gaming festival and it was drawing in geeks and nerds from every sphere, other people within what I would call the gaming community who aren't wargamers, computer gamers, board gamers, role players, people who just like nerdiness, like they've got a particular fandom and they want to enjoy it. So you're getting the cosplayers and the reenactors there. So a much more wider selection of people who've come to that particular event and are coming around and seeing our games table, but also other members of the public who've just decided to go, in this case, to Chatham Docks for the day and gone, oh, there's something else on. What's all this game stuff in here? And then they wander in and they see some of the tables. Now, give you an example, we had lots of families with young kids, and the kids, some of the very young kids were, they'd walk up to the table wide-eyed because you had all these toys on the table, but then they'd see the next one and they'd be off after that. They weren't necessarily interested. Some were, and some of their parents were trying to encourage their kids to take an interest in it, bit of good parenting. But we also had slightly older kids, maybe that computer generation, the kids that have probably only ever encountered gaming through the computer games, and maybe we're at the show because there was a large computer gaming element to the show. There was a whole section where they had computer games set up, and we're showing them, trying to not put them off by saying, look, this is a different way of gaming, but we're also interested in history. But that table over there, they're Wargamers, but they're doing a fantasy game. So showing them and being proud of the wider hobby and trying to celebrate that with them. It definitely involved there was definitely a different mix of people at the Rapture Game Show compared to the sort of wargame shows that we normally attend, and I definitely felt myself constantly adjusting and moderating how I spoke to people depending on whether they were a gamer, a fantasy gamer, or a historical gamer, or a gamer for a different type of game, computer games, whatever, board games, role players, or just complete newbies, people who had never done any of this and had just turned up for the day and wandered in and were going, what is all this? I definitely found myself changing the way that I spoke to people during the day, entirely dependent on what their background was, in an attempt to try and present the hobby in the best possible light, and to show that yes, we're all enthusiastic and some of us probably look a little bit strange, but we're all having a really good time and this is a fantastic hobby. Don't be frightened by it. Because not everybody that came up and had a look and had a wander amongst the tables was a wargamer, or is ever likely to be a wargamer. But they will go away, I hope, with a much more positive view of what wargaming is about and the sort of people that partake in it. So as usual, this leads me to asking, do you have a similar approach when you're doing a show and you get newbies, or non-wargamers coming up? Do you find yourself naturally changing the patter, the little speech that you're going to give out to people? As I say, when we've done shows in the past, we usually have a little blurb, 2 or 3 minutes telling them about the game and the figures and what we're doing. But we'll also have a shorter version for when we're talking to people who aren't wargamers, and a different approach to communicating with them, asking them questions as much as them asking us questions. Do you find yourself doing that when you're at a demo game? If you've ever done a demo game, of course, not all of you will. So as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this matter, because it was just an interesting experience, because there were so many people, probably more than that of the people that came to our table were non-wargamers, where compared to going to a regular wargame show where the majority are wargamers. As I say, I was constantly moderating the way that we spoke to people, and I'm sure the other rejects were doing exactly the same when we were talking to members of the public. And I'd like to know whether you do the same and what your thoughts are and ideas are for dealing with non-wargamers at shows when you're putting on a demonstration game. So I've gone a little bit long-winded today, but it was an interesting subject for me, and I really wanted to get into it in a bit of depth. And as I say, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed today's video, please like, subscribe and share. And if you want to keep up to date with my weekly videos, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, look after yourself, keep gaming, and of course, keep rolling high.